I have to say, I am so excited to be in a room with you practitioners. I feel like we're all kind of one team, marching towards the same mission of securing our employees, our customers, our data, and we're doing it together. So hopefully I can provide some value to you today. We're going to kind of take a step back in time a bit. I'm all about retro. Kind of feel like I even accidentally dressed retro today. So if you're a big Staying Alive fan or Saturday Night Live, Saturday Night Fever, that's what it was. So today we're going to talk about kind of the dissolving perimeter and want to take that journey back in time with you a bit. So year 2000, life was good. Life wasn't nearly as hard as a security practitioner because everything was within the bounds of your company's walls, right? Our network was inside, our employees stayed inside. We worked 8 to 5 jobs. I miss those days. And so as then technology started to grow, this perimeter started dissolving. We had BlackBerry, anyone remember those? 2003, remember they released their first mobile device that would allow you to be on the web browser. And so the perimeter began dissolving. By 2007, Apple had released their first iPhone, and the journey started with our employees and our culture changing to being outside of our own walls. Our employees, our devices began being more mobile. We started engaging with new applications outside of our walls. Our contractors, our customers, our partners started engaging with us in different ways. And then we started seeing more applications and more data continuing to expand outside of our reach of our walls. New level of privileged access, being able to be accessed to your privilege accounts, again, outside of your perimeter. And more devices. By 2010, Apple had released their iPad and launched a whole new way of working for our employees, as well as interacting with our customers. This required then new security measures and new ways to connect, so APIs and microservices started becoming more on the forefront of our minds and our strategies. So how do we secure all of this? Today I'm just going to take you back to the simple fundamentals that you should be thinking about with a successful IAM program. Walking you through some of our reference architecture that we've built at Optiv. It's going to be very simplistic. I'm not going to pretend like it's super fancy, but hopefully we'll all take some accountability and maybe measure yourselves on where you are on this kind of journey to a mature platform for your identity and access management. So at the base layer, we all started at some point somewhere something like this, right? You had your directories, you've got your employees, different business applications, perhaps some cloud apps. You had data, maybe not so much unstructured, but structured data that you started collecting, but you had some Word documents and Excel files that you were keeping out there somewhere. And as well as maybe some ticketing systems to be able to resolve issues or grant access. Everything was very manual. There was needing to be some way to start governing this information, so most started focusing on those SOX applications and making sure that you're compliant in some way, depending on what type of business that you were running. So being able to have those reports and those audit trails were really important. More importantly, a way to remediate or at least certify that the access that your users had was appropriate. Beginning to then build those integrations out so that you have a more streamlined process instead of building Excel files and having your DBAs dump files in and you're scrubbing that data manually. Became very laborious. So we're looking for a way to streamline that, and those integrations started becoming more possible to be able to pull that data in and give you at least a nice seamless report to be able to review your access. So came then the identity administration, the need to be able to provision and deprovision quickly, increasing efficiency with our companies, being able to onboard our users quickly and with appropriate level of access. That way then your employees are more effective day one. That was really the goal. Security, I think, was more on kind of the back end way of thinking when we first started thinking about how do we just give them access faster. We didn't really think about the fact that our employees probably stick around and grow with our companies if we're doing things right and treating them well, right? Building those loyal customers as well. But loyal employees grow transfer, move departments. And so being able to then connect to that governance and making sure that you're remediating any access so that they're only having access to what they need for their current job, rather than the copy Bob mentality that maybe some of you are still trying to undo of access that has been templatized, and it's granting more access than that user really needs for their actual job function today. Continuing to then integrate and provide more than just your Active Directory or any virtual directories that you're provisioning to, but also connecting them better, more business applications so that they have more of that access on day one and reduce the help desk burden of creating more and more tickets that you're constantly having to fulfill. Again, tying on to that seamless experience then, we added SSO, finally reducing the number of usernames and passwords that we were asking our end users to remember. It was impossible. You'd see spreadsheets saved with passwords on them. You'd see Post-it notes. I think someone just mentioned the other day, there was a hack from a social media page where the guy was taking a selfie, and the desk behind him had a Post-it note with the password mentioned, and that company was breached. So it's still happening today. There's still bad fundamentals out there, right? Unfortunately, and I'm sure all of you in this room are still shaking your head that it's the simple things that are still beating us out there within our own companies, within our customer database as well. So we've got to be careful and make sure that we're doing these fundamentals right and educating not only each other, but our end users, and really being those champions out there and evangelists for identity and access management. So when SSO came along, this was one thing that the end users really started noticing was, you just made my life easier. And it was easy to start then championing, well, we want to do more with this. Multi-factor authentication came along because we've made it easier for them to log in. We don't know what their access is if we've not started with a governance program, but maybe we've started with more of the seamless experience side of the house. So being able to then make sure that we've got the right baseline of governing our users, making it easy, but also challenging them if they're going towards any sort of high-level sensitive data or your sensitive applications. And so multi-factor was definitely a necessity that I'm sure you've all heard about as part of this conference over and over again already, so I won't preach on that. But it's an absolute necessity in your security posture today, especially when you're starting to connect to your structured and unstructured data. How well do you know who's accessing that data? Why should they be accessing that data? Should they be accessing that data? Is that really required of their job? So then began the journey into data governance, wanting to make sure that you understand not only where your data is at rest, but what's happening in motion and building out those policies. All of this takes a lot of strategic work and understanding what your needs are and what your policies should be. But that data discovery is absolutely critical, making sure that you have your arms around where all of that data is, because data is the one thing that grows. The more it's used, the more value it has. It's not like a car. The more it's used, the more value it has. Therefore, the more risk is associated with that. Think of, we all have data, whether it's intellectual property, customer data. There's all sorts of different types of data out there that hackers want to get their hands on because it has value, and they know that. So we need to treat that like it has the value that it really does. We have to have some sort of emotional investment in our security posture. And so when we think about, as we start streamlining and integrating with our access, also protecting it, protecting those keys to the kingdom. While your crown jewels are absolutely within your data stores, you've got to protect who has access to the most sensitive pieces of that, as well as who has the privileges to manipulate different systems. So being able to then, of course, tie in your privileged access management is absolutely a necessity as well. Now, when we talk about PAM in and of itself, to some of you, that may be just a buzzword, or it may be we've got a vault, but it's really the whole story when I'm talking about privileged access management to my customers today. When I go out and I meet with the different practitioners, different consumers, trying to mature their identity program, it's not just about vaulting. It's about having that accountability and being able to not only see who has access to what, but what are they doing with that access. Session management is very critical in being able to have that accountability and making sure that we see what you're doing, and if it doesn't look appropriate, being able to shut you down in motion. Also protecting those endpoints or that lateral movement. So making sure that you're focusing on the whole story. While I understand that there's a lot of niche solutions out there that get you started, you've got to think of the whole picture eventually and really maturing that out. As well as then, of course, building that into that integration from the top down so that now when a user is onboarded to the time that they leave, you have full control, full visibility, full accountability with them. And this takes, again, some of that emotional investment in wanting to build out a secure platform and maturing that. It's not an easy journey. When I said in the beginning, I feel like we're all one team, we absolutely are. But we've got to feel that way. And as you build out your different security strategies with your culture, you've got to make them feel like they're a part of the team because they've all got an investment in this. You don't want to be the guy that said, I don't want to give up my SSH key. I'm not doing it. I've had it for years. You're not taking it away from me. That's an education and a coaching opportunity really for you to make sure that they understand and are bought into why this matters, because they don't want to be the scapegoat if things go sideways and there is a breach and his key was the key. Now he cares. You want him to care before that happens, not after the fact, right? So then Optiv spends a lot of time. This is really my day-to-day job of talking about how to plan, build, and run a successful IAM program. I spend 80% of my day talking about people and process, and about probably 20% then talking about technology, because it takes a lot of planning, a lot of strategy. You've got to get buy-in, you've got to get budget, you've got to get champions. You've got to strategize so that you've got quick wins along the way to show that the money that you've asked for is going towards a good cause. They can see the reward so that they continue to allow you to champion your full mission and what you want to accomplish in maturing your IAM posture. So we take a lot of time around helping customers understand what their pain points are. Sometimes it's not as obvious, and making sure that they've got the right people in the room. You guys are not doing it alone. HR is a key if you're looking at workforce. Marketing is a key. Legal is a key if you're talking about customers, right? So making sure that you have the right folks bought in, you have the right stakeholders is also part of that just strategy build, as well as then gaining that consensus of what should our plan be, what is our mission, and how are we going to then accomplish that. You start with a high-level roadmap of where you want to go, and then start taking those next steps of tactically, what is your business requirements? What are your functional requirements? When we talk about use cases, I think of it more as workflows. The end user experience being at the end, what do you want that to be? Maybe work your way up from there. How do you make that actually happen? And make sure that you've got that documentation. It's so much easier to champion what's going to change if you can show people how it's going to impact them. Before you're just in a POC and everyone's cheering along saying, yep, this technology is going to be the answer, and you plug it in and you didn't quite understand because the sales guy told you it does this, and you thought this was going to save you and just make your life so easy, and then it didn't do it the way that you thought it would. So being able to understand what your requirements and use cases are first helps you to validate and set that expectation of what you need that technology to actually do for you. So then being able to build out that implementation roadmap, you have now a tactical plan of how you're going to march to get there, as well as hopefully identifying where those points of quick wins are, because you may have limited resources. I know Optiv, we're constantly trying to find talent out there today, and while I'm blessed with about 120 plus practitioners that work alongside me out there in the trenches with our customers, we appreciate that it's also hard for you to find those valuable resources that have the right talent that have the right skill sets, perhaps, or have enough time. Maybe they're overtaxed with as many jobs as you tried to give them. They don't have time to run these programs. So being able to build out that tactical strategy around your implementation is also important to think about what's actually realistic for you, given where you're at and how many resources you have available. We've got to think of, not just the dream, but really where can you get to appropriately, and how well can you then run it from there? So planning and building and running, absolutely. Very difficult to do, especially if you don't start with a strategy. If you start with the product first, I see it fail every time. If you work in silos, we have customers with engineers that really have a lot of kind of gumption and want to be the hero, and so they go out and they commit to a technology. But then the other engineers kind of politicking and saying, yeah, I want to be important. He goes out, he buys the technology. And I see this over and over again where I walk into customers and they've got disparate technologies that don't talk to one another. One over here solving this problem, the other one over here solving that problem. There's no integration. Or perhaps they've bought two competing solutions that are literally out in the market today solving the same problem, but there's end user confusion because I'm logging in over here to do this, and now I have to log in over here to do this because no one in the room sat down and talked about what that strategy was. So again, making sure that you've got that strategy as well as the consensus and buy-in before you get to those implementation phases. And then once you've got the implementation phase done, like I said, making sure that you've got some quick wins, some realistic goals. On Monday, one of the Okta leaders shared with us some of their plans, and he said, a goal without a plan is just a wish. And that just really resonated with me as I thought about these conversations that I have every day with IAM practitioners is, you can't wish for a good IAM program. You have to roll up your sleeves. You have to follow some sort of these steps. If you haven't, you're going to end up rolling back down the hill and starting over. And maybe some of you have already experienced inheriting technologies that you really don't understand what its value is for you and your IAM posture. So we want to help you avoid that, or at least course correct if necessary. And then what is your strategy post go live? Optiv's not one to just walk away from our customers, but we don't want to cripple you so much that you're dependent upon us. So what does the skill set need to be? What's that knowledge transfer need to be for you to be successful so that you don't need your solution integrator there sitting with you side by side every hour of every day, being the one that's really still holding you up. We want you to be self-sustaining. It's the only way then that you'll be able to get to the next phase is if you can sustain each phase and move to the next. So being able to build this out, like I said, it's a difficult journey. It's not one that you can do alone, and we're happy to be here and team with you. One of the things that I was just talking about with the technologies, making sure that you've bought in on technologies that actually are built to work better together. This helps you to reduce the number of technologies that you're having to manage if you go with something like this. Not suggesting this has to be the only way. Walking in, though, and evaluating what your technology can do, how best to optimize that, before then you look at the next technology purchase. It's not about having more, it's about having it better together. That is really the key point in building a strong identity platform. Making sure that they all integrate. So I bring these up just because we've seen how the partnership between these three product vendors have really partnered well together. They all utilize each other's strengths. Now, I will caveat this with the identity administration piece now being something that Okta is actively, as we've heard for the last couple of days, if you've been here since Monday or yesterday, they're getting into more of that identity administration piece. And so that's going to take some strategy to understand what's best for you. Which path should you leverage? What's your environment look like? Every one of you, if you kind of look across the room, have a different infrastructure, a different culture, different needs, different goals, and different budget. So it's our job to kind of help guide you as advisors in the IAM space and making sure that you're making good buying decisions that are not only going to accomplish your short-term goals, but also think about Where do you want to be in the next 5 years? How do you see your company growing and changing? And are you buying technologies that are going to take you there? Or in 2 years, are you already looking to rip and replace? So when we look at this, obviously, there's a lot of holistic synergy between each of these platforms. They talk to each other well. They've built out-of-the-box integrations that can be leveraged for you and give you full visibility and control to your users and your environment. When we think of identity, especially at Optiv, we talk about it as it's the language of security. Identity truly is that cornerstone in all things that you're thinking about in your security posture overall. It even impacts physical security. So when you think of building out your program and your security program, if you've not really started truly harnessing an IAM strategy, the time is now. We've seen now everywhere, but truly identity is that core linchpin that you've got to start focusing on and making sure that everything else is built around that. So I will end a little early so that we can have questions, but also come visit us in the booth so we continue this identity conversation as well. So I know I've got a moderator. If we have any questions, I'd be happy to try and wing them here. Yeah.
Hi. As you're thinking about kind of the journey to the cloud and what it means for IAM, I think it's pretty clear from the kind of SSO and access layer. But what do you think changes as companies move to the cloud and on the governance side and the PAM side?
Yeah, so I spoke at a cloud summit, and I felt like it was a pretty disappointing talk for a lot of customers because fundamentally, nothing really changes with your IAM program strategy. You're still doing governance really the same way. You're still aggregating that data in and being able to review who's accessing what and whether those entitlements and credentials are appropriate for that user. I think the challenge is that some of those connectors, you're not being able to really get that data. So being able to make sure that, again, you've built those connectors, collectors, whatever word you want to use for the way that you integrate data into yourself, and making sure that it's meaningful, making sure that it correlates back to that identity and it gives you enough information to say, yes, that entitlement makes sense for them, or no, it doesn't. And I think some of the cloud applications out there now, they're a little bit more flat, so it's hard to tell what they can really do with that access. So you've got to be able to make sure that you can crawl that data and that you can have more rich information about what that account is going to allow your employee to access. Yeah. As well as then, some of the platforms now, as we go into more SAS type structure, you're going to be more limited in how your process and procedures are. So I see that as being a real big challenge with cloud right now is we've gotten used to the way that we do things. Unfortunately, especially in kind of the Americas, for my customers that are here in the United States, we're very used to the Burger King mentality of having it our way. Everything on-prem was super flexible. If you didn't like the way you did something, you could just kind of custom code to make it happen. Where now, with SaaS being kind of the way of the future and everyone trying to move to that, we're asking people and processes to fit now into a box and telling them, specifically around governance maybe, you only get a manager or an application owner certification type. You don't get whatever flavor of the rainbow that we used to be able to provide you and be able to really span different types of workflows and stuff. Now it's much more in that regimented box of these are your choices on how you're going to do access governance. And I see that being more of a challenge around just culturally a shift for people to understand their job that they've done the same way for maybe the last 10 years is going to have to change. And it's not necessarily bad, but people are still resistant to change. So yeah, I would just tag that on as well.
Yep. I have a quick question. So with a lot of these solutions and platforms moving on to the cloud, from your experience, are you seeing that customers are implementing both consumer IAM as well as workforce IAM together, or are they still on the same platform, on the cloud, or are you still seeing that they are two independent implementations?
I see it always being two different implementations, and I think that will probably continue, at least if you're using the same technology, you may create separate instances. And I'm okay with that from a security standpoint, because I think it's smart. Don't put all the cookies into the same jar and make it easy for a breach to really be bad. Still separating church and state a bit with your consumers and your employees, and being able to govern access. Plus, then it's easier to maintain what your provisioning workflows need to be. Your consumer is going to be very flat. They access what they get to access, and there's no changing. You're not going to have a transfer use case for a consumer like you would employees. So I still see some technologies really focusing more around that workforce and being very good at the complexity of transfer use cases or contractor conversion into employee and vice versa, being able to manage those different types of levels of access versus what you would do with consumer and managing CRM data and just making it quick. I think the response time is definitely the demand there for consumers. Yeah.
Yeah, on one of the previous slides you had the recommendations for different software. You had SailPoint up there. Yeah, that one. So is that SailPoint Identity IQ, like the hybrid solution, or you feel pretty good about the Identity Now IDaaS solution?
Oh, you really put me on the spot.
Right.
How many of SailPoint people do I have in the room? So both work this way. It's, again, what is your culture, what is your need, and how big are you? But both solutions now offer that integration with CyberArk. The data governance piece right now, of course, yes, integrates now only with Identity IQ, but it's on the roadmap to also integrate with Identity Now. So for me, when I meet with customers, it's really about sitting down and understanding what their requirements are and what their culture is for being able to fit into the box. Because Identity Now, it's apples and oranges as to how those two solutions really stack up against each other. And if you've been an Identity IQ practitioner, I grew up with hard knocks of learning that solution. It's very, very flexible, and that's one of the things that I loved about it. But now also being able to kind of streamline and say, you don't have a choice, this is just how it's going to work, and being able to roll that out very quickly, it condenses then down what you're doing, the strategic part of it. There's no real debate with Identity Now. So that's kind of what you're looking for, is we need the solution to be able to say, all right, this is how it's going to work, and now in 6 weeks we've got a quick implementation. It's a great way to go. So it really depends on what your culture is and what your requirements and use cases are, what you're trying to accomplish. We do see some that go with a hybrid too, to kind of use the best of whatever fits for you. So it's just a great solution as far as the flexibility goes. The customer can decide kind of what's best for them, but it's my job as a practitioner, as an advisor to them, make sure I'm guiding them towards what they're actually going to need and how they're expecting it to function. So a lot of setting expectations.
Hello. So you mentioned people being in silos before. So how would you advise somebody to help take down some of those silos so they can penetrate and get to this? As we know, the identity exists in several different branches, and you may not have the buy-in. So what would you suggest for somebody to do to tackle that conversation?
Absolutely. That's a great one. I think it starts with leadership. So if your CISO is not the one driving it and being involved, they absolutely have to be. It can't be individuals wanting to be the hero, and bringing them to the table sometimes is difficult. I know, Optiv offers workshops, and sometimes we find that this is the first time any of these folks have ever sat in the same room, and it's a little shocking when that happens, but it's the reality. They may also work remotely, and so that's a challenge to make sure that everyone's really, on task and involved in that. But it starts from the top down. If you're not having that team mentality from the top, then it's never going to be dispersed. Your engineering team may be a team, but they're going to remain in a silo because it's not advantageous to them in any sort of way unless they're being told you need to team up over here. So culturally, it really has to start from the top down. Yeah.
I'm aware that Okta says, you guys are cloud vendor neutral, but I did see the AWS and Okta some kind of, integration more than I would like to see with Google or Microsoft, but I don't see the Google and Microsoft presence here. So could you just give us some kind of, maybe I call industry politics, could you explain a little bit? Yeah.
So I think your question is like, why are some advertising what they do connect with versus others are kind of being a little bit more vendor, yeah, they're supposed to be vendor neutral, yeah. And we are as well, right? So I walk into customers all the time that don't have any of this. They have a whole different mix, and my job is, how do we just help it work together? So this is literally just a visual. I'm not trying to champion any sort of necessarily any of these brands, but the idea of you should really only look at 3 or 4 solutions in a stack to be able to accomplish a full IAM program. Now, if you're using bits of Microsoft or bits of Google, again, building out those requirements and use cases to make sure that then whatever technologies you're bringing on top of that stack will complement that. And we do see in the industry, there are some that don't connect well. That Microsoft will admit they have limitations. They're really good at Microsoft. And so being able to help our customers take advantage of the investments that they've already made and then build still that mature program on top of that is really what Optiv's goal is kind of wherever you are in your journey, we want to just help you continue to get better. And so whether it's this technology stack or a whole different mix, it doesn't matter to us. Let me just level set because I'm getting in trouble for saying it doesn't matter. It matters. But from practitioners and the services that we offer, we can be very vendor neutral and help you to mature your program. Yeah.
This is going to be a simple one. Can you explain me the connector between the access management to the privileged account management? Like what are the use cases that connect them? I'm
sorry, ask again.
You have a connector between the access management and the privileged account management. So what are the use cases and how are they connected?
Yeah, so some of that would be either if you want that to be on your SSO portal, that's something that you're linked to log in maybe into your PAM solution. So if you've got like CyberArk, it can be a tile, but then perhaps you will also have to multi-factor into that. So making sure that there's an integration there so that it can bounce off and make sure that you are authenticated and authorized to use that platform before it just lets you in and you've got access to kind of the keys to the kingdom. Now, obviously, you shouldn't have full access to everything in CyberArk unless you're one of maybe a very small handful of administrators for that specific tool. That's the beauty of how they build out their safes, is to really still reduce the amount of access that you need to do your day-to-day job as whatever type of administrator you are.
Hi, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about who typically owns these types of systems in organizations and where do you see the most success? In my organization, cybersecurity team typically owns these things, but in other places it's IT infrastructure type teams that do that. And as we go to the cloud, as these things become more commoditized and more important as part of the digital transformation, the ownership piece seems to dictate a lot of success. So I wonder if you could just comment on that in general.
I can't say that there's a general rule of who does it better. I think it's whoever can champion and get that team approach, that team mentality. So typically I see it more on the InfoSec or the infrastructure side, just because they are the guys who started the security conversation and said we need to get our arms around this. I've seen it come from just the directory services side of the house and saying, hey, we need help. We're managing way too many help desk tickets and managing everything through Active Directory. And then they start building a different type of team. But typically it's more around the InfoSec or your information security teams, sometimes infrastructure. But it can't just be one or the other. You've still got to bring them all into the same room because everybody has a stake in making sure that this is successful because you're touching everything and everything touches this. So it's an and all the time. And again, not having that high level buy-in is critical. Your CIO, your CFO, your CISO absolutely need to be involved and on the same page because funding, mission, strategy, and and being able to push that out. You've got to have training people. So, your training staff or your change management staff need to be apprised of what your goal is, because they're going to be the ones eventually kind of writing what those user guides are going to look like, of how now you're logging into the system. When you tell them, hey, we're going to roll out SSO, great, no one knows what that means from the end user point of view. So when you give them a URL and say, okay, reset your password, they're all sorts of confused. Why is there a new way? If you're not championing the message along. So it's a huge team effort. It's not the same people at the table every time. And when we're writing up requirements and use cases, if HR is not in the room, I'm the first one to say, where's your HR rep? Because that's where it all starts for workforce, right? Your customer experience person might need to be in the room then for a SIAM program when you're talking about, customer identity and what that customer experience is going to look like and how that's being impacted. So, but for who really owns it, usually it's like the InfoSec or your infrastructure team that kind of takes the ownership, but they've then got to have champions and warriors out there supporting them.
Just an extension of the previous question, implementing something like this will definitely change the way that people are working, and that's also going to force an architectural change. And so as we start thinking about change management, what are some recommendations for how you might segment teams or different squads to own this? Because they're all relying upon one another.
Yeah, I think it's about setting the expectations of what those changes are. And we start that, so at Optiv, when we document all of those requirements and use cases, those use cases and those workflows are really valuable then for them to start understanding what those segmented teams need to look like, how each team's going to be impacted, and that way they can start championing what is that new job going to look like for you. So it's easy to see on paper the visualization of, okay, I used to do this and that, but now I log in here, the solution's going to do this, then this, and now I got to click this, and now the job's done. And being able to then train for that and just kind of educate and set those expectations up front, and then figure out what those appropriate teams need to look like. Maybe you're reducing some headcount, and there's a lot of heartburn when people see that their manual jobs that used to give them 40 hours a week are now minutes. Being able to reassure them that we're going to find you something of value to do now. Maybe you're a certification administrator that is going to oversee that all the workflows actually fired out the right reports to the right owners and things like that. But I think once you've built out those use cases and understand what those workflows are and who's going to be impacted and how, then it's much easier training, strategy, and just setting expectations too. Yeah.
So as far as setting expectations, we're just about to embark on an IAM program, and this looks quite complicated or like very fragmented with a bunch of different solutions. And you mentioned about going for funding. Mm-hmm. This seems to be like a lot of money. And so is this like what we have to look forward to? Is
and
this
all
the best we
vendors in the
have?
room are like, we can help. It's not a cheap journey. It's not cheap. It's not super easy. But I will say, and I can only speak for Optiv because obviously that's who I'm here for. But we work with our customers to try and figure out what can they do on their own. How can you make this better? So if we kind of go back a few slides here to how do we get you here? And maybe it's not with some of the best of breed solutions. Maybe there are some things that you can do better manually to start helping you kind of get there. But yes, there will be some financial investment, and there's just no way around it. But trying to right-size that approach for you, maybe you don't have to roll out the full kit and caboodle of every solution. So it's trying to find kind of what those points are that you absolutely need, and being able to kind of work with the product vendors to say, okay, year one, they only need to invest X because that's all that they're going to be able to accomplish, and then identifying it by risk. What are your priorities? Where do we need to close the gaps? Because you may have some great manual processes that are protecting you in different places that you don't need additional funding for year one. You maybe want to automate it down the road, but it's not the glaring risk that you need to address. So it's kind of sitting down with you and whiteboarding out where are you vulnerable? Let's close that gap, and let's try and do it with as minimal of an investment if you have limited funds as possible. I mean, I work with a lot of companies out in Hawaii that are not huge, booming metropolises, but they have huge security needs. I mean, they're literally the most hacked state of all of us in the United States. So there's a need there to come up with programs for them that are affordable, that are realistically helping them just better secure themselves. But yes, eventually you're gonna spend some money. Big need in Hawaii. Yes, if any of you are looking to move to Hawaii for security jobs, I can help you find several.
Hi, one quick question. So this particular slide looks great. It talks about all the areas in the space. But is this more centric towards enterprise IAM versus SIAM? I mean,
Yes.
I'm trying to see if you have anything from a SIAM perspective which...
I don't, and so I apologize. Okta had me pull an audible and changed my topic at the last minute. So for those of you that are looking at the survey saying, I thought she was talking about SIAM, I apologize, I didn't warn you in advance that they had changed. So if you looked at your app, you knew we were going to talk about more of an IAM journey into the cloud. This would look different for SIAM. Obviously, you wouldn't have employees and contractors. You're not going to do the identity governance because you're not probably writing up attestation reports for what your customers have access to, but you will have onboarding, offboarding workflows, especially around now the consent management, making sure that has response if they say, I don't consent to sharing that information or I don't want to be a part of that anymore. So yes, there's absolutely going to be elements of this that would change, but if you want a seamless experience, if you have multiple brands that you're wanting your customer to be able to move across brand very easily, then the SSO strategy is going to be crucial. And I work with some companies that say, yes, we manage 10 brands, but to the customer, we don't want them to know that any of these 10 brands are connected in any sort of way. So SSO, not a big selling point for that particular customer. MFA, being able to validate those users and that fraudulent activity of creating just random, consumer identities and things like that, that validation step absolutely would be, though, something that they would want to take advantage of. And still being able to secure your data and those types of things, eventually you still wrap a full IAM program. Even if you're doing consumer, you've got employees that are engaging with those types of databases as well. So there are different elements, yeah.
One last question.
Oh, okay.
Hi, I was particularly interested in IoT, but not necessarily within corporate, and how does that map out in this sort of exercise? And IoT in terms of HVAC systems, car parking system, building management systems, where we don't own it, but we're actually liable and accountable for it in terms of them providing us services in our business.
So if I understand the question right, I'll take a stab at this. So you don't own the actual devices, but you're engaging with them. Is that correct?
They're pretty much, in order to operate, leveraging off our network.
Yeah. So I mean, IoT, all of these types of devices that are popping up, you still have to associate an identity to it. It should have some sort of code. So it's going to look very similar in being able to manage that. Basically, we've seen a lot of customers start creating their own identities for that particular device and managing it that way so that they understand what it has access to and be able to start really managing it like you would in a human identity of making sure that you provision and deprovision it in and out of the right systems and that you have visibility to what it's accessing, where it can crawl, where it can't crawl. Yeah, it's a slightly different strategy, but we are seeing that being managed with really an IAM type of structure and just treating them as non-human accounts.
Apologies, could you leverage the exact same architecture for the same, for IoT systems?
No, not necessarily.
Yeah, I didn't think so.
No,
okay.
not necessarily. Some of the same foundational premises, but differently, yeah. Yep. All right. Thank you all so much for your time. I really appreciate it.